Thanks for joining this presentation of droning in on fire scene documentation with 20/20 vision. Once again, my name is Matt Strader. So I know Megan just went through a lot of this, but real quick, I'm a fire investigator here at AEI. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Fire, Arson, and Explosion Investigation from EKU. I'm a certified fire and explosion investigator, and I do hold my remote pilot certificate, which we'll speak about more later. So I'm going to kind of go through what this whole presentation is going to be about. And really, it's about what we do as fire investigators and how we do it, and the new technology that is out there in the world that we're starting to see be used by fire investigators. So it's not necessarily designed for fire investigators, but more or less it's designed for a multitude of other things, and fire investigators are actually utilizing it to document their fire scenes. And we'll talk about how this kind of pertains to individuals in the insurance industry, or if they're working at a law firm, and how this kind of information can become really crucial to investigations. And lastly, I'll go over some 3D scanners and drones and some new kind of fun technology that we're starting to see that investigators are using that you might expect to see if you hire a fire investigator. And I'll kind of go through all these with case studies to give examples so you all can have a better understanding of what to expect. So first off, the National Fire Protection Association has a document called NFPA 921. This is essentially the standard of care for the fire investigation industry. And I'm not going to go into extreme detail of every bit of this document, but I will kind of cover a few essential concepts. So whenever we investigate a fire scene, there's really two things we are trying to determine. The first being origin, so where the fire actually started, and the second being cause. When we're looking at the origin of a fire, we kind of follow a few different, what we like to call pillars of origin determination. So really it's fire dynamics, which is we'll get into later, and how fire kind of moves, fire patterns and arc mapping, which are different patterns and visual components of a fire that are left behind after the fire has actually occurred. And then we'll go through predominantly what this whole presentation is about is the new ways we're collecting witness statements and kind of background information on fire scenes. And so once you determine that origin, then you can kind of move forward with a cause. So ideally your origin determinations first, and then you can move forward determining a cause later on. And here's a couple examples. So not every fire scene is the same, but a lot of times you go through the general area, and that could be a bedroom or a garage, and then you can sometimes pin it down to a specific point. And it's really important when investigators are doing this to identify lots of different potential ignition sources. Things like the manufacturer of a stove, or an electric range or microwave, or a laptop. These things are really important to document thoroughly, because later on, if this turns out to be a subrogation, or maybe someone's on the defense side and needs to know, okay, did that laptop indeed cause the fire? Or possibly if we find a lighter or gasoline or something along those lines, you're looking at arson. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, and as this presentation goes on, you'll see how these kind of pertain to the new technology aspect. So now we can kind of get into fire dynamics. This is really the chemistry of fire. Once again, I'm not going to go through every essential scientific concept of it, but really I'm sure a lot of you, especially if people out there have ever been in Boy Scouts or anything like that, a lot of times we have the fire it's called the fire triangle, but really it's the fire tetrahedron. You need heat, fuel, oxygen, and the key component, which is an uninhibited chemical chain reaction. And to have all four of those together is actually how you get a fire to happen. So from a fire investigation standpoint, you're looking at it, you're looking at fire chemistry and fire dynamics and how the fire behaves. And you're able to tell based on fuel loads or ventilation how a fire is likely to behave under a specific circumstance. So this is a nice little analogy. As you can see on the left, there is a waterfall, and then on the right is an upside down photograph of a fire occurring above a chair. And if you flip that around, it kind of moves in the same way, obviously the opposite. Water is flowing towards the ground and fire is obviously moving upward. So that's just an interesting analogy to kind of explain to people that it behaves somewhat like a fluid. And so understanding that can be really useful for fire scenes. And so now we can get into fire patterns, and these are always fun. You can kind of look and see different patterns actually can show investigators different information about a specific scene. So patterns are always created by fire effects, which is essentially just different things that the fire leaves behind. Charring, sooting, melting, oxidation and color change, thermal expansion and deformation. These are all just examples of fire effects that, if analyzed properly by an investigator, can be used as a pattern to determine certain characteristics of a fire, where the fire possibly began, and rule out other things. So it's really important. These are kind of, when we're looking at later when we get into the witness statements and all the new technology we're using, all of that is being used primarily to document these types of fire effects and fire patterns, as well as different statements and from individuals. So here's some more examples. And when you're looking at fire patterns, they can give investigators a lot of times a nice understanding of how the fire moved through a specific structure. So a fire here on the right, that's kind of a it's called a V pattern, and it indicates that the fire likely started and moved upwards, coming up from this first story. And when you're looking at a fire scene, a lot of times different patterns can show you the duration of the fire. So if one side of the room is much more damaged than the other side, and most of the fuel has been consumed by the fire, that can indicate a fire started over there first. Not always, but it is usually a pretty good indication. And so one of the rules of thumb, but that can be kind of different sometimes, is the greatest area of damage is typically your origin, or you're at least getting closer to it, but that's not always the case. So once again, all of these types of patterns are just something fire investigators are looking for when they're collecting data. So here's a couple examples. This is like an hourglass pattern. You can see there on the corner, the chair is pretty much consumed at the bottom of the corner. And this kind of gives you an indication of where that chair was positioned. If it was up against the wall, it would produce a V pattern likely, and if it's kind of away from the wall, it's going to produce a hourglass pattern or a cone pattern. So this can just help investigators kind of reconstruct the scene to the very specific details that it may have had during the fire. So here's another example of a V pattern. Here's another V pattern in the back of a trailer there. And so now, after we've gone through patterns, one of the most crucial aspects of an investigation that I think a lot of investigators tend to leave out sometimes is the witness statements and electronic data. And NFPA defines this very specifically, but also broad enough that there's all types of information out there that investigators can utilize. Just some examples would be homeowner or tenant, if you work a fire. The neighbors a lot of times have information, maybe contractors that may have worked on the home previously, social media posts, smartphones, and security footage. So I'm going to go through each one of these, kind of giving some examples of how these are being used and how they are not always the most obvious thing to look for when you're investigating a fire. So first off, when an individual shows up to investigate a fire, our job is to document the scene thoroughly. And a lot of times this happens with photographs, video, 3D scanning, and drones. These are just some of the ways we're doing it now. And you know, back in 20, 30 years ago, it was primarily just film, photographs, and paper. And now we're starting to see iPads being used and DSLR cameras. So the technology aspect of it has really ramped up the productivity of an investigation, the efficiency as well. So when we're looking at a fire scene, we're there to collect data, ultimately. And the documentation aspect is something that most fire investigators know and will utilize, but collecting the other data can sometimes be overlooked. So other data would include witness statements and interviews, pre-fire photographs, which we'll get into, some historical weather data, satellite imagery, and all kinds of new data that's being collected from different pieces of technology. So social media, I'm sure many of you have seen social media and use social media almost every day. Cell phone cameras and what we like to call the Internet of Things, or IoT. So this kind of includes mapping and aerial photography, smart home devices like Ring doorbells and cameras and security systems. It also includes online shopping and all kinds of different fire alarm and safety systems, which we'll touch on, and smart vehicles. So we'll hop into smartphones. So here you can see there's a photograph of the person at the concert that holds the video up the whole time. I'm sure many of you have experienced that type of behavior. And this kind of concept, though, can be applied to a lot of things. 81% of Americans have smartphones, which is surprisingly low in my opinion. And obviously the largest demographic is young people. But really the way I like to look at it is it's the first time in history that we have immediate access to record everyday events. And we're seeing that play out day by day here in the news even. Whether it's an awesome experience somebody has with the UPS driver, or it's a tragedy occurring on the interstate, people take out their cell phones to record these incidents. So it can be good, bad, and obviously it could be a fire. And what we're starting to find is that many people will record fires on their Snapchat or their Facebook or different platforms to post. And if fire investigators can locate that information, it can a lot of times give us really useful data, and it can be overlooked a lot though. So another one is pre-fire photographs. A lot of times if somebody has a birthday party at their home and they are taking photographs of their kid's birthday party, and then maybe the next week there's a fire, those kids' birthday party photographs may give the fire investigator a nice understanding of where everything was located in the room, where the different fuels were, what items were there, potentially if there was a manufacturer, specific manufacturer of an item, and it's hard to identify after the fire has actually happened. These kind of photographs can be incredibly useful. And finally, we also look at metadata. Metadata is essentially just data that's collected and preserved within a photograph. And we'll get into that later about how useful that is and how it kind of works. But here's my first case study here. This was a fire we did out in California. And these photographs were obtained from the insured. So the insured had a new system put in for their firebox, and this ultimately caused a fire later on down the line, but we just had to ask them, do you have any photographs? And I guess they were excited about it getting installed, so they had some photographs of the installation process. So just a simple question there gave us information like the dimensions and layout, and then also we were able to identify the brand specifically and the model specifically. And we were able to potentially identify if there's any installation issues based on the dimensions and layout and things like that. So here's after the fire, and you can see it was a smaller fire, but it primarily affected back here. But all that information prevents us from having to rip out all the walls and examine it. So it can be really, once again, it can save a lot of time and money for everybody involved if we can uncover these kinds of information. So here's another case study. This happened here in Denver, actually. And all these photographs and videos were collected just by bystanders and witnesses to the scene. So this is a huge fire. So that's just one, photograph. But that photograph, that video can show investigators a lot of information, of the fire actually occurring. So always something to look out for. This one gets always interesting when we talk to people and are able to understand that their property was listed on a real estate website. And a lot of times these real estate websites will actually hold that information for quite a long time. I've found homes that are been sold for years, but all the information is still listed on Zillow. And so when we're looking at fire scenes, a lot of times it can be useful to use these real estate listings like Zillow and Trulia and MLS to get a better understanding of the structure, possibly if there was utilities involved, or where things were located, or how the home was actually constructed, things like that. So it gives us a nice pre-fire layout, and we're able to identify fuels, potential ignition sources, and once again, the brands and models, that always comes into effect, especially if you're working defense or subrogation stuff. That stuff can be really crucial, because if a microwave is burned up to a crisp and you can't figure out what the model is, then it's hard to actually put into action any recovery towards that. So understanding all this information and where it's located is pretty crucial. So here's a little before and after of a case we did out here in Colorado. The picture on the left is the before of this scene, and it's from a bit different angle. If you look there on the back, the chimney with the nice piece of wood there, that is the same as on the left photo. And so that you can kind of understand the geometry of where these photos were taken. And obviously the big crater in the right photograph was an effect of the fire, but that is where the kitchen once was. And you can see on the left, you can identify different components of the kitchen. So it's able to help kind of with a scene reconstruction aspect of what was there, where was it laid out, and what models or of items were there. So now we get to look into metadata. Metadata is essentially just data that is encrypted into many of the things we use every day. Primarily, it's photographs and videos, but stuff like text messages and email and phone calls, these kind of collect metadata in a way as well. The way it works, every time you take a photograph on your smartphone, unless you have manually turned this function off, it is collecting the exact GPS coordinates of where that photo was taken. So it's what's called geotagged. So if you take your iPhone out and take a photo, it's going to show the exact place that that photo was taken, the exact time, and lots of different information about that photograph. So this can be really useful, but it's really important to also understand that when you upload these photographs, if somebody takes a photograph with their iPhone and uploads it to Facebook or Instagram, those programs are automatically stripping all the metadata from the photograph to preserve the user's privacy. So pretty much every platform you post photos on does do that automatically. But if you get a photograph directly from the homeowner or the neighbor, it'll tell you exactly where it was taken, when it was taken. And so from a fire investigation standpoint, we can use those photographs to kind of put together a timeline of events, where the fire may have occurred in what part of the home first, where things were located, stuff like that. So it's always important to remember if a insured has photographs to get them like airdropped or emailed or texted directly to you, because that can preserve all the integrity of the metadata and be used later on. So we talked about metadata stripping the information if you use, or the Instagram or Facebook stripping the information of the metadata. But if you upload it to their platforms, you just have these photographs, which can still be useful. And I've actually been using them quite a bit to just locate and interview witnesses. And there's something I also found, that many firefighters and first responders really love their jobs. I went to college with a lot of firefighters, and there's something I always notice is that the firefighters always love posting the fires they go on. I mean, they're very passionate about it. And so they post these fires, and they post GoPro footage of a fire that they're actually responding to. And so what I have found, that if you figure out what fire department responded to whatever incident, a lot of times you can go to the fire department's Facebook page and trace it back to specific firefighter, like personal pages. And I have found photographs and videos of firefighters actually responding to fires that I have later investigated. So seeing that kind of live stream of them showing up, what they actually saw, is incredibly useful. But without knowing that this fun little tidbit that firefighters love posting this kind of stuff, it's kind of that information is likely just lost to most investigators. So it's important to know that that exists and that it's kind of a common occurrence. And once again, it also gives you a pre-incident photographs when you're using social media. Like I said earlier, if, it's a kid's birthday party and they take photographs a week prior to the fire in the same room, it can give us some useful information. Or if it's an event, if it's a concert venue and people take photographs, and maybe a week later there's an incident at the concert venue, you're able to kind of put together where stuff was located, if there were sprinklers, if there wasn't, things like that. So just social media has become not only a tool for people to connect online, but also a tool for fire investigators to gather data on fire scenes. Obviously, it's an unintended tool, but that's kind of what we're starting to see enter the industry. So here's a little social media case study. This was from a fire out in the mountains I worked, and there's very little information on it, but I did find a little news article, and it shows there at the bottom of the news article, courtesy of David Breed, which I assumed was them giving credit to the individual that took the photograph. So I started searching around for this individual and managed to find a fundraiser for his snowmobile club that was based in the same small town. And through that, this was kind of an outdated fundraiser, but I found his email and was able to talk to him. He gave me an entire interview of because he's the one that actually called the fire in. He was able to give me an entire interview of everything that happened. He was able to provide me with where he first saw the fire, and a bunch of photographs and things that we can able to utilize later on to corroborate our findings. So just kind of using the handy dandy Google was able to bring me to this guy through social media platforms, even if they're outdated. And here's another one. This one's always a good example, I think, of how much data can potentially be on a specific fire. So we had very little information given to us. They basically said it was in Haltom City, Texas, and it involved some garbage trucks, and they gave us the address. And so I punched that into the handy dandy Google and found this YouTube video. And so I looked into the YouTube video, and this guy's YouTube channel has more than just this fire. It has multiple fires from multiple different scenes. So I was kind of interested as to why this guy was photographing, if he was a firefighter or a fire investigator or something. Turns out, I look him up and he just has a blog of his own website, and he just does this as a hobby. And he has a relationship with all the first responders and firefighters, And he goes around just responding to different scenes. He waits around with his police scanner and shows up to the fire scenes and takes photographs of the fire scenes as they're occurring and just puts them out there for free as a hobby. And so I kind of reached out to him, and he managed to give me everything he had on this specific fire. But after this incident, every one of these fire trucks, I mean, these garbage trucks here in the photograph were all completely damaged. They're all total losses. So a photo like this showing the fire beginning or appearing to begin in the front of that one in the middle, that's huge. That's a huge piece of information provided. And the fire department did not take any photographs of this scene. So kudos to this gentleman that just takes photographs for fun. I mean, it really helped out on, I'm sure, on hopefully on other fire scenes as well for other investigators. Kind of gives you a clear view of the scene. And I think something that gets overlooked a lot as well is it helps investigators come prepared to the scene. A lot of times investigators show up to a scene, if they show up kind of blindly with little information, they might not come prepared to do the job properly. So a scene like this, you're going to want to bring ladders and different tools for different jobs. So obviously we can't bring our entire workshop. So it's important to understand what's kind of going on with this scene. So if you're flying there, driving a far distance, you know what to bring. And ultimately, that leads you to more accurate investigations. So this kind of information is just more data that we're able to analyze. So now we can hop on to online shopping. And I'm sure it's no surprise, especially given the given circumstances of today's world, that 70% of Americans shop online, probably more now. And by 2023, it's going to be about 91% of Americans are going to shop primarily online. And what's useful from an investigation standpoint is, especially with Amazon, a lot of this is logged. A lot of these purchase histories are logged and kept for seemingly ever. So when we're looking at fire scenes, if we need to identify a specific product or a specific make or manufacturer, we can examine where the individual purchased it. A lot of times it just takes a bit of poking around and they will remember they bought it on Amazon or Walmart.com or something, and you're able to figure out the exact specifications. So here's a quick example. You can see this is just an Amazon order history, and it was purchased in 2009. Able to go back year by year, all the way to 2009, to figure out this exact model of laptop and get all the specifications on it, so the fire investigator knows what they're looking at if they're looking at a burned up laptop in a fire scene. So here's another example. This was determined to be the origin of the fire, and we found this little battery, rechargeable battery pack inside that origin. And those are two e-cigarette vaporizer pins stuck into the battery pack there. And when we're looking at it here in the lab, we can't figure out what brand it is. It's completely charred. And so the damage was rendering it essentially unidentifiable. And so what we did is we talked to the tenant and figure out that he bought this on Amazon a couple years prior, and we're able to trace back his Amazon purchase log and figure out the exact make, model, when he bought it, everything we needed to know of the exact that exact piece of equipment. And so this is our we were able to purchase one and get a hold of one, and now we have the comparison between a brand new one and a completely burned up one. And so for investigators at a lab exam or something like that, that can be huge to know ahead of time what type of product you're actually looking at. So now we're looking into the Internet of Things, or IoT data. And so this has sort of infiltrated many parts of our daily life, from Google Earth and Google Maps to smart home devices and cameras and doorbells and all types of security systems that everybody's installing. and they all seem to be cloud-based, and they share information amongst one another, and they record a lot of this information and keep it for different data analytics and things like that. So it's important to remember that many of the things we're starting to see enter this market are all recording and attached to the internet, which can be really useful. So this was a fire scene, and this is just a simple photograph. This is actually something I pretty much do on every scene. I think it's kind of become a pretty popular thing for investigators to do, is to go, before they get to a scene, do a couple minutes of research, punch in the address, and a lot of times the Google car will drive by that address at some point in the last few years and give you a nice clear image of the exact scene before it was burned up. And so this was taken from Google, but I've actually found that, surprisingly, I know Bing gets a bad rap from most folks, but Bing has some really high quality map and aerial photography images. And so a lot of times we'll take Street View, and then we'll use Google Earth or Bing, I think it's Bing Earth, and we're able to grab all the surrounding area. You can hopefully see where the different utilities are running through to the actual structure. You're able to see where stuff's located, if it has a garage, if it has multiple stories, things like that. So that kind of information is just easily accessible to investigators. And so this is the same scene after it's burned up. You can see that's the Google Earth shot or Google Maps from like about a year prior, and then this is the date of the date we actually went to the site inspection a few days after the incident. So it gives us a nice layout, once again, of all the utilities, and a nice before and after to kind of understand where stuff was laid out and how it was damaged. So I'm going to touch on fire protection systems, not incredibly detailed, but I'll touch on a few things. And essentially, when you're working a commercial fire, like a lot of times a school or an office building, they will have different fire protection systems installed, and every system is catering to different needs for that specific structure, but they all pretty much collect data. And that data can be if a fire occurs, which sprinkler went off first, which fire door was open first, things like that. So these kind of systems are incredibly useful, actually, not only for suppression, but actually investigation. And so I'm going to have a video here. It's not necessarily about specific fire protection systems as much as it is about life safety systems, but it gives a nice idea of what to expect when looking at these kind of systems and how we're going to start seeing them infiltrate the fire investigation industry. And I'm going to, bear with me, I'm going to try to play this and see if we can do it smoothly with no sound.
They're universal in America. Walk into pretty much any building that's open to the public and you'll see them. Roughly 7 by 10 inch plastic signs emblazoned with neon red or green letters that say exit. These things have been around for decades and saved countless lives. But in a world that...
I don't know if the sound is working for you folks.
Yes, the sound is working. We can hear it, Matt.
Okay, excellent. Just want to make sure before I...
It's increasingly being threatened by complex hazards to safety, like active shooters. Some people are questioning whether it's time to move on from traditional exit signs. Welcome to Learn Something New by NFPA Journal. The American exit sign as we know it dates back to the mid-20th century. After the Triangle Waste Company fire in New York City in 1911, NFPA created the Life Safety Code, from which exit sign standardization eventually emerged. In other countries, a wordless sign featuring a little green man has become the standard. While both of these sign designs have undoubtedly saved countless lives over the decades, some experts are starting to question whether we need to take exit signs to the next level. The problem with the current signs, they say, is that they're static. What they favor instead is what's called dynamic exit signage, signs that can essentially adapt based on certain conditions or scenarios. If the fire alarm in a building goes off because an active shooter pulled it and is now in the lobby waiting for people to come pouring out of stairwells, it would be ideal to have a building in which the exit signs could change, indicating occupants on upper floors shouldn't exit to the lobby. Proponents of dynamic exit signage also say traditional static signs have simply become hard to find in large, complex environments like airports and malls, where a lot of signage competes for occupants' attention. Having dynamic signs as simple as flashing exit signs would be better, they say. The 2021 edition of NFPA 101 will likely include the new annex section on dynamic exit signage. While it makes note of the reasons behind the growing push for the technology, it also indicates there are some concerns. The proposed language reads as follows: the potential problems of such a solution.
So what's really interesting about this kind of dynamic exit signage is it not only can be used for if there's an active shooter or something like that, but it can be used for fire investigation as well as fire suppression. If a individual is running towards an exit sign and they're actually running towards an area that's on fire, it could be really useful for that sign to be able to pick up what areas are in danger and what areas people need to be leaving from. So, and once again, that would all hopefully be connected to a cloud system. It's just something to kind of look for in the future. I think we're going to start seeing stuff like this kind of come out here in the next few years. So now we can hop over to home security, which is always kind of one of my favorite aspects of a scene investigation. When I was interning at a fire investigation firm in New Orleans, Louisiana, I was working with an old FBI agent that was now on the private side, and he used to always say, look across the street. And it kind of started when we were on a scene and we were putting together some different things, and we were looking at all the information available, and we couldn't figure out what exactly happened. Stuff did not seem to add up, and it started kind of leaning towards arson, and we were kind of confused as to why different aspects of the investigation were all present. And then he kept saying, look across the street, and it took me a while to catch on, but eventually we looked across the street and there was a Ring doorbell on the neighbor's front door. So we just had to walk over there, and from what I've found, most people, if you explain you're an investigator, they almost are always willing to help, especially if it's a neighbor's home or something like that. People are generally pretty nice and they are pretty helpful, and it gave us access to all the cloud storage of their Ring doorbell, and that showed exactly what happened. And an individual decided to barbecue the house. So this is something we're starting to see become really common. In fact, 30% of Americans are going to own a security camera by 2021, which is pretty crazy that they've become so affordable. You can just buy one on the internet for $100, hook it up to your cell phone, and stick it on your door, and now you can protect yourself from package thieves, but also hopefully collect data in the unfortunate event if your home ever caught on fire. So, and this is, I'm sure many of you know, this is what the Ring doorbell, I'm sure there's many other brands out there, but I think this is probably the most popular. It is a cloud-based storage service. So if you pay the $1 a month or whatever the price is on it, it'll store that data respectively for the person. So here's another example. I will give you a forewarning here. This video was on an incident we worked here in Denver, and there's an obstruction there on the front. I guess it was either a cracked screen or a piece of like a leaf or something, but no one was harmed in this fire, fortunately, and you will hear some screaming, but if you just keep your eye kind of on the right bottom corner next to what appears to be a grill there, you're able to kind of see the fire progress pretty rapidly. But once again, no one was harmed, but you will hear screaming. So not only does that information right there give us a pretty solid understanding of the origin of the fire, because there was actually individuals in the room watching TV before they even noticed the fire. And maybe some of you have seen, I should have included it in this, that the photo or the video that recently came out in the news here in Wheat Ridge, there was a fire, and it showed how quickly just a candle caught the curtains on fire and spread throughout the home pretty rapidly. So it's a pretty fast thing. And this kind of information actually notified the homeowner. The homeowner was in the back and got a notification on their cell phone that there was somebody at the door, and then they looked and saw smoke and fire, and so they were able to get everybody out. But this kind of information can put together that timeline like we talked about earlier for an investigator to know the exact events leading up to the fire and after. Now we can get into smart vehicles, which are always fun. And right now really the leader in electric vehicles and smart vehicles is Tesla. I'm sure many of you have heard about Tesla, but something I learned recently about Tesla is actually they have 9 dash cameras that are like motion censored on every one of their vehicles. So if you pay for the subscription, it goes into Sentry, what's called Sentry mode, and whenever you leave your car, it's actually recording. If somebody comes up to the car, you're able to record exactly where they are in the car. If they want to key your car, or if somebody accidentally hits it in the Walmart parking lot, you can get their data, you can get their license plate. And so this kind of information, I think, was primarily intended for security reasons, but we're starting to see it play out as just another way of collecting video footage of fires. And so this next video, if you keep your eye up there, you can kind of see it right now in the preview. On the PNC Bank sign on the inn, the sign catches on fire. And this was all caught on a Tesla that was parked in the parking lot. And so it starts out pretty small, and if you kind of watch it, it'll move down to the bush and start moving pretty quick. But right there, that information is pinpointing a fire pretty darn accurately. It doesn't take much to get this green bush to start going. So in the event that, a fire like this took out the entire bank, and it would take investigators possibly days or weeks to sift through all the debris and actually figure out what happened, a video like that can save everybody a lot of time, provide a really accurate conclusion to the investigation, and ultimately figure out what exactly happened and save everybody some money. So these Teslas are incredible in the terms of what they're actually collecting. And something I like to think about is, what else are they going to be collecting? By 2040, most of the cars on the road are going to be electric vehicles. And assuming they follow the path of Teslas, they're going to be recording all kinds of information and probably sharing it to a cloud-based system. So they're going to be sharing weather data and how hot the car is and where it was parked and things like that. So it's just something to kind of look forward to and to see where this takes us, not only in our, culture and society, but also specifically in fire investigation, what kind of information is going to be available that is currently not available. And so one of the key points to all of these slides here that are showing the specifics of an investigation, how we come to certain conclusions, how we collect certain data, is that you all in the insurance industry are almost always the first point of contact with the insured. And so when we show up as a fire investigator, we show up after the incident has occurred, everything's burned up, and it's our job to sift through all the burned up stuff to figure out what exactly happened and if there's any parties responsible. when you all get that call, a lot of times it's that day or very recent. For us, it can sometimes be months before a site exam is actually able to get scheduled. So a lot of times critical information can be lost. And so what I mean by you're the first point of contact is if you get the call the next day, you may have access to information and data that a lot of investigators are never able to get access to, whether it's cloud-based or the insured deletes that information or doesn't back it up properly, or possibly it's just fresh on their mind. A lot of times when people go through the tragic event of their home burning, if it happens if you're talking to them the day after that event, they're probably going to remember more specific details of their day and what exactly happened than they would in 2 months when an investigator could potentially be interviewing them. So it's really important to understand the availability of information that is there just after a fire occurs and how you all have the opportunity to collect that information and hopefully pass it on later to the investigators. So now we're going to kind of move away from the different technology that is kind of out there being used by investigators and insurance professionals alike, and kind of moving towards the specific tools investigators are starting to use that are an advancement in technology, primarily 3D scanners, which some of you may have seen, and also looking at drones and things of that nature. So going through 3D scanners, we'll kind of go through how they work a little bit and what to expect if you hire someone and they have one of these. Really, there's two types. There's laser, LIDAR, that's the actual word for it, and camera photogrammetry. LIDAR scanners are a little more complex. They're much more pricey and much more difficult and less user-friendly. So primarily what we're seeing in the fire investigation industry is camera photogrammetry, but actually lasers have a lot of really good pros that you can use and really help an investigation. So we'll kind of go through what's important about those, and we'll play a short video.
With a touchscreen display, it's as easy to operate as a digital camera. The rotating laser of the scanner touches, in the truest sense of the word, its surroundings. The laser beam is used to measure the distance to the object and, together with the device's rotation angle data, determines the coordinates in space.
So essentially, this is the laser version of a 3D scanner. It's essentially blasting a laser thousands and millions of times and acquiring that into a point cloud, which takes somebody with a lot of skill to actually develop it. And once that's developed, then you can put together a scene and walk through it. The way these are some examples of the way it works. So these are kind of like a fly-through overhead. You can look and see this is the actual raw data, and then you can overlay a photograph on it and actually see it, what the colors would be like and things like that, not just the raw data. Really what happens is multiple scans are taken and they're all kind of stitched together and overlaid with a photograph for the, I guess, ease of being able to look at it and understand what's going on. Here's a couple more examples of the laser. Once again, this is the LIDAR. Here's a quick little fly through. So if this was a park or a large building possibly, you could gather specific measurements that are very, very accurate and able to tell where stuff's located, possibly walk a jury through this entire setup to understand where everything's at. And now we can get into the 3D cameras. And so these are much more user-friendly. They're much more affordable. Essentially, they do the same thing, just in a different way. So they go around shooting photographs in a 360 and stitch it all together for you, so you actually don't have to do it, which is pretty nice, and create an entire system of these 3D photographs that can collect measurements and things like that for a user to then later on walk through. And so these were actually primarily kind created for the real estate industry. Here's a quick video of how this actually functions. You can see it spinning, collecting all the data. And then you pick up the tripod, move it to a new location, typically within 5 to 8 feet. And then it'll automatically stitch that together for you so you can go through later and examine the exact scene as if you were there. And so what these were actually made for was primarily real estate. And you will see them if you log on to search for a home or an apartment or something. A lot of times the real estate agencies are starting to use these and give you, especially in the days of COVID, you can get a nice walkthrough of the whole place as if you were right there. So I'm going to hop out for one quick second and then jump back in and show you all a Matterport scan, a 3D scan of a fire scene that we did. Okay, so this is a fire scene, and as you can see, each one of those little circles on the floor is where a scan was taken. So you can hop around to different scans, examine the entire scene. You can hop over here, you can kind of skip around, go floor to floor. You can put labels. So this is a location overhead, electric service drop connected. So it just gives us the opportunity to put little labels if we want to explain where stuff's at, or maybe if there's a pattern involved. So we can hop around and go down the stairs, we can go out here. The one downside to using this is as opposed to a laser scanner, is you can't really use it outside. It doesn't really like collecting data outside very much. But if you're using it inside on a fire scene in a residential or commercial structure, it can be really useful, especially how easy it is to share. So if you all, maybe some of you all have hired investigators and they might actually share the link. It's all cloud-based. So you could log this in. You could click on this link yourself on your laptop or desktop and walk through the scene as if you were there. And we can leave little notes of what to look at and things like that. So this really has become a pretty common practice in fire investigation to really cover all your bases so that you can make sure every little piece of information is covered. One of the biggest things in fire investigation is, it's always a funny saying, is that it's always the photograph you didn't take is the one you need. And when you use a scanner, or the investigator has access to a scanner like this, and they can go through, before they do anything, you can go through the whole scene. It takes maybe half an hour, go through the whole scene, scan it all out, figure out where exactly everything's at, and document the whole thing incredibly thoroughly. That really just covers all your bases to make sure every little bit of information and every detail is collected. So now we can look at drones, and drones are always fun. I think drones kind of started out as a pretty high-tech thing, and now they've kind of almost infiltrated into toys and things like that, but it still holds true that they are really powerful machines and can be used for a variety of different things. A couple things to know about drones is they are pretty expensive, but they're incredibly useful, especially if you're working a very large scene or you're assigned to a very large loss, whether it's a wildfire or a large commercial building or a high-rise. A drone is practically imperative at this point to have on scenes like that and to have access to that. A lot of times there are third parties that are involved in just doing drones, but you're starting to see some investigators, and this is where it comes in. I have I'm a certified commercial drone pilot. You're starting to see investigators are getting the credentials to fly their own drones, so they don't have to outsource and get a certified drone pilot. And so this is kind of a fairly new thing that the Federal Aviation Administration has put together, and it really just regulates who can fly drones and all the different regulations involved of where they can fly them and how high they can fly them and things like that. So if there's a large loss, you definitely want to look for and have access to an individual that has the access to fly drones. So here's some examples. These are some overhead large containers at an oil well site, and you can see photos like this were taken with a drone, able to grab some really nice overhead shots, bird's eye view, and you can clearly see where all the soot and charring is on these. And it just gives you these give a really nice overview for a photograph to show to somebody. So this is a nice little example. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'll kind of skip around because it's kind of a long video. I actually obtained this when I worked at a large explosion in Houston a few months ago, and pretty huge warehouse exploded. And I was actually just going around the vicinity of the explosion and managed to find an individual who was just a hobbyist and was flying his drone over it for fun and just live streaming it onto Facebook. So I talked to him, and he was incredibly nice and gave me all the information he had, and he also gave me all of the drone footage that he had. So here's a couple examples of how useful drone footage can be. And this is like 2 days after the explosion occurred. So lots of this debris could be shifted around from a storm, or from if people were coming in and taking the copper pipes, or just naturally falling over. So to get that information quickly like that is very useful. I'll kind of hop around. You can kind of see this for the scale here. We can see if we can. You can see up there on the right, there's some people walking. So this is the warehouse, and these folks are walking around, I guess, just taking a look at it. And to kind of touch a little bit, drones and 3D scanners are now being morphed together into 3D scanning drones. So drones are starting to gain the capability of being able to fly through an entire environment and collect all the data and stitch it all together. So you have, if it's a large wildfire or something, you can actually like fly over as if you were there. So some key takeaways I think that are really important here is always be on the lookout for ways to collect fire scene data. So if you're working a loss, and maybe just hop on social media or ask the insured if they have any cell phone footage, or if they have a Ring doorbell camera, or if they said it starts in the kitchen, if they recently bought a new toaster. You know, all these little tidbits of information can be crucial to an investigation later on down the line. Once again, you all are our first point of contact with the insured, so that information can be much more available to you at certain times. And as well, when you're hiring a fire investigator, to always look for the different capabilities that might be needed for a specific scene, whether that is maybe it's a fatality and you need to make sure every single aspect of that scene needs to be covered. A 3D scanner is your best bet to document everything properly. Or if it's a large building or warehouse or wildfire, drones maybe have a capability of investigator with the capability to fly a drone over the scene. And it helps to always know that the expert always has the right tools for the job. So thank you all for logging in today and listening to this presentation. Once again, my name's Matt Strader. I'm a fire investigator here at AEI. Feel free to reach out. That's my email, all my different contact information. I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out. And I really appreciate you all logging on today, and I hope you stay safe out there.